3 p.m. in Granbury, the Center for Calling and Career will be hosting a workshop titled How to Prepare for a Career Fair. This event will be a culture credit.
Also, tomorrow, BCM is sponsoring Duck Day from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Come pick up your favorite duck outside the fountain at AH.
𝗦𝗨𝗣𝗣𝗢𝗏 will be hosting a friendship bracelet making hour on Thursday from 11 a.m. to noon in the Student Center. Stop by and make some bracelets for you and your bestie.
LCU Rec is hosting an ultimate frisbee tournament on Thursday at 7:30 p.m. The roster minimum is 5 and the maximum is 10. You must have a minimum of 2 girls on your team. Sign up on IM Leagues no later than Wednesday at noon to participate.
There's still a chance to see Theater Louisiana Christian's production of Cinderella if you haven't. From March 31st to April 2nd, there will be more showings of the play in Impact at 7 p.m.
For ticketing information, call 318-613-4064 or visit TLC Facebook page for a link to ticket sales.
Just a reminder that SGA elections are coming up on April 5th, so remember to cast your vote and make your voice heard.
Now let's throw it out to Brandon Brown with the Den TV for a look at what's going on in Wildcat Athletics.
What's up, Wildcats? This is the Den TV, and it's time for all things LCU sports. I'm Brandon Brown. Let's get right into the action. The Lady Wildcat softball team won both of their games against Jarvis Christian College last week. They sit at number 2 in the Eastern Division and have a big-time matchup this week against number 14 in the nation, Texas A&M Texarkana. The team will play the Eagles twice today in Texarkana, with the first game starting at 3 p.m. Later this week, they will play the University of the Southwest at home in another doubleheader, Saturday starting at 11 a.m. The men's baseball team fought hard but could not manage to come out victorious in their series against LSU Shreveport. The team will look to move forward as they travel to take on the University of the Southwest. It will be a 3-game series starting with a doubleheader on Friday at 1 p.m. and the last game on Saturday at 12 p.m. Make sure to follow the Den TV on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Keep up with scores and updates on lcwildcats.net and have a Wildcat Week. For all things LCU sports, I'm Brandon Brown. Back to you guys at the desk.
Thanks, Brandon. If you need anything to be announced in the Wildcat Minute, please email wildcatweekly@lacollege.edu 2 weeks before the event so we can make announcements in a timely manner.
Be sure to follow us at Wildcats Media on Facebook and Instagram and at lcwildcatsmedia.com to keep up with what our Wildcats Media News team is doing this semester.
For Wildcats Media News, I'm Carmen Taffy.
And I'm Dale Brown.
I'll see you later.
Well, good morning and welcome to chapel this morning. We have Dr. Frank Turek with us again this morning. I also want to be sure to mention that we have the arrival that begins tonight in this building at 6:30. If you're free, then please, by all means, come and be a part of that. This time we're going to pray and we're going to hand it off to Dr. Turek. So if you would, please bow your heads with me. Lord, we come to you today and we thank you for your goodness and kindness. And God, we thank you for the fact that you are not like us, God. That you are supreme and you are the sovereign ruler of the universe. And we pray today that you would challenge us during this time, that we would be attentive and that we would hear the things you want us to hear. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.
Good morning, Wildcats. All right, how many of you were here last night or were somewhere else at the time? All right, how many of you are here right now? How many don't respond to surveys? That's what we need to know. 3 out of 10 don't respond to surveys. All right, if you were not, how many were not here last night? Not here. Where were you? Huh? I mean, come on. We were going through the evidence that Christianity is true with these 4 questions. Does truth exist? Does God exist? Are miracles possible? And is the New Testament telling us the truth about the resurrection? Last night we talked about does truth exist, because a lot of people say there's no truth. And when someone says there's no truth, you're going to ask what back? Is that true? Obviously there's truth. Second question, does God exist? Last night we gave 3 arguments for the existence of God. The one argument from the beginning of the universe, the second argument from the design of the universe and the design of life, and the third argument is from morality, that we know that certain things are objectively right, which means other things are objectively wrong. And from those 3 arguments, we can deduce, without reference to the Bible or any other religious book, that there's a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created all things and sustains all things to this very moment. And so when someone ever asks you, how do you know that God exists? You ought to say, I know God by his effects. Creation is an effect, the cause must be a creator. Design is an effect, the cause must be a designer. Morality is an effect, the cause must be a moral lawgiver. Reason is an effect, so you must go back to a cause known as a mind. And we can do the same thing with Jesus. We'll do here in a minute. Third argument, are miracles possible? Or third question, I should say, are miracles possible? And last night we pointed out that the greatest miracle in the Bible has already occurred, and even atheists are admitting the evidence for this miracle, even though they don't think God did it. And the greatest miracle in the Bible is what? Creation, Genesis 1:1. Because if Genesis 1:1 is true, every other verse in the Bible is at least possible. It's possible that miracles have occurred, because if the greatest miracle has occurred, the creation of the universe out of nothing, then other miracles certainly are possible. Actually, it takes a lot more faith to believe that no miracles have ever occurred. Why? Well, think about it, ladies and gentlemen. For atheism to be true, every single miracle claim and spiritual experience in the history of the world has to be false. Is that possible? Yeah, it's possible. Is it reasonable? No, it's not reasonable. And if Genesis 1:1 is true, it's possible that Jesus actually did rise from the dead, that God rose him from the dead. So that's where we're heading here this morning. Is the New Testament telling us the truth about the central fact in the New Testament, and that is the resurrection of Jesus? Did he really rise from the dead? Now, I'm going to give you 8 lines of evidence to suggest that the New Testament writers are telling us the truth here. We don't have time to go through all of them. We're going to look at 2 of them, and then hopefully we'll have time for some questions. These lines of evidence all begin with the letter E, because I'm a Baptist, and you have to alliterate everything, all right? The first line of evidence that they're telling the truth is that we have early sources, that the New Testament documents were written down early, and the data in the documents is actually earlier than when the documents were written down. Like, for example, there are ancient creeds in the New Testament. Gary Habermas, the top theologian and scholar on the resurrection, has identified at least 41 creeds in the New Testament that predate their writing, the earliest of which is probably 1 Corinthians 15, verses 3 to 8, which talks about Jesus dying and rising from the dead, and to whom he appeared. Also, there are eyewitness details throughout the text. For example, there's 84 details alone in the book of Acts from chapter 13 to chapter 28, the end of the book, that are known eyewitness details that only an eyewitness would know. This is not an invented storyline. Eyewitness details throughout the New Testament. Also, there's embarrassing stories. I'll explain that one in a minute, because we're going to go through that. And number 4, excruciating deaths. Number 5, there's embedded confirmation in the text. What's embedded confirmation? This is hard to explain in a short period of time, so I'm just going to give you 2 words to Google. Here are the 2 words: undesigned coincidences. Undesigned coincidences. If you Google those 2 words, you're going to look at evidence that is probably the best evidence you may have never heard of, that shows us that the New Testament writers are independently witnessing the same historical events. Just check that out, undesigned coincidences. Number 6 is expected predictions. That deals with Old Testament prophecy. And if I had only one Old Testament prophecy to make my case on, it would be Isaiah chapter 53, written 700 years in advance. In fact, Jesus actually cites that as pertaining to him, or as applying to him. Number 7 are extra biblical writers. We talked a little bit about this last night, that there are 10 ancient non-Christian sources within 150 years of Jesus' life who they mention aspects about Jesus and the apostles, the history. And when you add up their references, you get a story congruent with the New Testament. These are household names like Josephus, Suetonius, Thallus, Phlegon, people you're probably reading earlier, right? No. These are, many of them, for the average person like myself, they're obscure. But if you look these up, you will see that these individuals, although not eyewitnesses, are actually saying things that agree with the New Testament. They're not saying that they believe Jesus rose from the dead. If that were the case, they'd be Christians, right? They wouldn't be non-Christians anymore. They're saying the disciples believed he rose from the dead and were willing to die for that belief. That's pretty good corroboration. And then finally, number 8 is the explosive growth of the church out of Jerusalem. It's really hard to explain how Christianity could emerge out of Judaism in Jerusalem on an empirical claim. What's the empirical claim? That the tomb was empty, that Jesus had resurrected from the dead. How could you squash Christianity immediately if that claim was false? What could you do? Yeah, you go to the tomb, take the body out, and the Jews and the Romans were all too willing and wanting to do that. They didn't want Christianity to be true. They could have refuted it immediately by taking Jesus' dead body out of the tomb. They couldn't do that. Why? Because he was still using his body, obviously. It had resurrected from the dead. Now, there's a lot of detail in the books on this, but we only have time to cover a couple of these, and I want to cover number 3, embarrassing stories. Embarrassing stories. This kind of testimony goes like this. If there's something embarrassing to the author or authors in the text, historians know that those embarrassing stories are probably true. Why do you think they're true? Because you're not going to invent details or stories that make you look bad. You might invent things that make you look good, but you're not going to invent things that make you look bad. In fact, let me ask you guys a question. How many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look good? If you don't have your hand up right now, you're lying to make yourself look good, and it's not working. We know you're lying. All right, how many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look bad? No, you don't lie to make yourself look bad. You might lie to make yourself look good, but you won't lie to make yourself look bad. Well, the New Testament writers, and by the way, it's true of the Old Testament as well, but we're really just looking at the New Testament. The New Testament writers have filled the New Testament with embarrassing stories that make them look bad. They never would have invented this. That's why we call this the dove factor. They're not making it up. In fact, here's just a few of them. Notice the New Testament writers depict themselves as dim-witted. How many times do you read in the text where they go, hey, we didn't know what Jesus was talking about. We didn't know what he meant, right? It's only later, after he's ascended to heaven, do they finally go, wow, I could have had a V8. You know, why didn't I see this earlier? They don't get it. Also, their leader, Jesus, calls their earthly leader, one of the disciples, the leader of the apostles, Peter, he calls him Satan. Now, do you think they made this up? Do you think Mark, who wrote this down at one point, said to Peter, hey, Pete, I'm going to make this a real interesting story. I'm going to have the Lord call you Satan. What do you think Peter would have said? Have him call you Satan, right? This is embarrassing. This is not helpful. And then Peter says, Lord, I'll never deny you. What does he wind up doing? He winds up denying him 3 times. And then at the crucifixion, all the disciples, maybe with the exception of one, they all run away. This is like a Monty Python movie. Run away! They all run away. And who are the brave ones? Who are the brave ones? Ladies, who are the brave ones? The women. The women are the brave ones. Now, who wrote... That's right. I am woman, hear me roar. Go ahead. Now, who wrote the New Testament down? Men. Now, what man is going to invent that he was hiding for fear of the Jews why the women went down and discovered the empty tomb? Would any man in here invent that? No. If I was there, I'd make myself look good, wouldn't you? I'd write something down like this. Let's see, we marched right down there and we overpowered that elite Roman guard. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. John said, get out. Peter roundhouse kicked him. Philip said, we'll be back. And then on Sunday morning, we marched right down to the tomb, and we saw Jesus, who congratulated us on our great faith. And then we went and comforted the trembling women. I would never say I was Mr. Sissy Pants why the women went down and discovered the empty tomb, yet all 4 Gospels say that. And oh, by the way, Why would you never say the women were the first witnesses in that culture? Forget about the fact that it was embarrassing to men. It was. But independent of that, why would you never say the women were the first witnesses? Anyone? Yes, because a woman's testimony was not considered on par with that of a man. So if you're making up the New Testament story, you'd only have the men be the first witnesses. Yet all 4 Gospels say the women were the first witnesses, which is telling us what? They really were. In fact, one of the women was a formerly demon-possessed woman. Oh, gee, what a great witness, right? Why would they say this? They're just saying it because it's true, even though it's embarrassing. I actually had a woman come up to me once and she said, Frank, I know why Jesus appeared to the women first. And I said, why? And she said, because he wanted to get the story out. I said, that is an excellent point. I had not thought of that. Because ladies, any ladies in here married? When your man comes home from work, does he say much? There could have been a nuclear explosion down at the plant, right? He's not going to tell you. You'll hear it on the news before you hear it from him, right? You'll be watching the news going, hey, hon, what? Oh, yeah, I forgot to tell you the nuke blew up. I've been hot for 3 days. What's for dinner? He's not going to tell you, right? I can't even believe this next verse is in the New Testament, but it is. In Matthew chapter 28, this is the culmination of the Gospel of Matthew, the biography of Matthew, where Jesus has his disciples and he's giving them the Great Commission. You know the Great Commission. Go therefore, make disciples of all nations. Notice he doesn't say make believers, right? There's a difference. Make disciples of all nations. As he's giving them the Great Commission, it says right there in verse 17, some believed, but some doubted. What? He's standing resurrected in front of them, and some of his own disciples are doubting. It's like they're standing there going, you see that guy over there? Yeah. That guy over there is Jesus. Oh, no, it can't be Jesus. He was just killed not long ago. No, I'm telling you, it's him. Look, Jesus is dead. The Romans killed him. It's him. It can't be. They know how to crucify people. They whipped him. They nailed him to a cross. They put a spear in his side. Blood and water came out. Jesus is dead. It's him. It can't be. It is. How do you know? The women told me. Right. They're not making this up. There's even potentially embarrassing details in there about Jesus. In Mark chapter 3, it says that Jesus, or his family, wanted to take Jesus home because they thought he was out of his mind. They thought he was nuts. Now, you may have heard the scholars say that the New Testament writers invented Jesus to be God. Oh, really? Then why is Mark chapter 3 in there, which is almost universally recognized to be the earliest gospel? This is embarrassing when your own family doesn't believe in you. His own brothers don't believe in him. They don't think he is who he says he is. He's called a drunkard. He's called demon-possessed. You think they invented that? They're calling the Lord demon-possessed. He has his feet wiped with the hair of a prostitute, which easily could have been seen as a sexual advance. And oh, by the way, notice there are 2 prostitutes in Jesus' bloodline. Who are they? Rahab and Tamar. Do you think when Matthew and Luke got together to do the genealogies, they said, you know what, I really think we should spice up the Messiah's bloodline a little bit. Let's put a couple of prostitutes in there. What do you say, Rahab? No. In fact, there's a lot of shady people in the bloodline of the Jewish Messiah. Judah, from where we get the term Jew from, not a good guy. David, a man after God's own heart. Yeah, but he's a liar, adulterer, and a murderer. Gee, I guess there's hope for the rest of us then. Huh? How about Bathsheba? Do you know Bathsheba's in there too? But when Matthew gets to her in his genealogy, he won't mention her name. You know what he says instead? Uriah's wife. Ooh. He's telling the truth, but it's a slam. You notice that? Who's Uriah? Husband of Bathsheba, whom David had killed so he could have Bathsheba. This is not an invented story. They're telling the truth. And then Jesus is hung on a tree. If you're making that up and you're making up a Messiah to the Jews, you don't hang him on a tree. Why? Because according to Deuteronomy 21:23, anyone who's hung on a tree is under God's curse. Well, Jesus was under God's curse. What curse? The curse of sin we all put him under. You realize there are 2 trees in the Bible? In Genesis, you've got the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. When you get to Revelation, you have the tree of life. But you know there's another tree right in the middle. You know what the tree right in the middle is? The tree they hung Jesus on. Because when we messed up at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the only way we could get back to the tree of life is if the Messiah was hung on a tree to take our punishment on himself. But if you're making all this up, you don't say these things. There's a lot more and embarrassing details in the text if you want to go further, but we got to deal with one more, and that's excruciating deaths. This word excruciating literally means out of the crucifixion. That's where the word comes from, excruciating. And this is the argument that says that these men who were in a position to know whether Jesus had resurrected from the dead or not died excruciating deaths when they could have saved themselves by simply saying, look, it never happened. In fact, it's really important when you read the New Testament documents to realize that what you're reading are documents written down by Jewish people who thought that Yahweh was the true God and they were God's chosen people. All of the writers of the New Testament, with the exception of Luke, he's the only Gentile, all of them are Jewish believers in Yahweh. Question, why would they invent a resurrected Jesus, a man who claimed to be God, when A, they didn't think a man could claim to be God, that would be blasphemy, and number 2, they didn't think a resurrection would occur in the middle of time. They did think one would occur at the end of time, according to Daniel chapter 12, but they didn't think a resurrection would occur in the middle of time. Why would they invent this if they're already part of the chosen people club? The answer is they wouldn't. Why would they? To get themselves beaten, tortured, and killed? In fact, take a look at the apostles' beliefs and practices before and after the resurrection to see what kind of transformation they had. Before the resurrection, they believed in animal sacrifice, right? They've been slaying lambs to Yahweh for hundreds of years. Then suddenly Jesus comes along and they go, you know what? We don't have to slay all these lambs anymore because these lambs are just symbols of the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Here he is right here. They do away with the sacrificial system virtually overnight. Before, they believed in a binding law of Moses. Afterwards, they're believing that Christ's life fulfills the binding law of Moses. Before, they believed in strict monotheism. Afterwards, they're believing in a Trinity, 3 persons in one divine essence. Yes, I know the Trinity is hinted at in the Old Testament, but it's much clearer in the New. Before, they believed in the Sabbath. In fact, they thought they could be stoned for not obeying the Sabbath. Afterwards, they're worshiping on Sunday, and Paul says, don't let anyone tell you have to obey any Sabbath or festival day. Do you realize out of the 10 commandments, 9 of them are repeated in the New Testament? The only one that isn't? Keep holy the Sabbath. Why? Because the Sabbath signified rest. And who is our rest? Jesus is our rest. He showed up. We rest in him. We don't work to earn our salvation. Jesus has done all the work. Also, before, they believed in a conquering Messiah. Afterwards, they believed in a sacrificial Messiah. Before he showed up, they believed in circumcision. Afterwards, they're believing in baptism and communion. Now, Wildcats, what would cause these pious Jews who thought they were God's chosen people for like 2,000 years to suddenly abandon all these things on the left and adopt all these things on the right? The only thing I can think of is what psychologists call an impact event. What's an impact event? An impact event is an event that occurs in your life that is so impactful, so dramatic, that it can change your perspective immediately. You might not remember what you had for breakfast this morning, but if you experienced an impact event, you'll remember everything that happened at that event, even though it was 5, 10, 15, 20. Some of you are older than that, 30, 40, 50, even 60 years ago, you can remember what happened. In fact, there's only a few people in this room, maybe nobody. Let me ask the question anyway. There's some people up there too. If you can remember where you were and what you were doing November 22nd, 1963, raise your hand and hold it up high. All right, ladies and gentlemen, look around. See these people with their hands up? These people are very old. November 20th, 1963 is my earliest memory. I was 2 years old and 2 days. Yes, I'm 60 years old. I know I don't look a day over 59. In fact, when I hit 50, my wife was very encouraging. She said, honey, you're going to live to be 100. I said, how do you know? She said, because you look half dead already. Actually, November 22nd, 1963, I was 2 years old and 2 days. I'm standing in the living room at our home in 𝗦𝗨𝗣𝗍𝗍, New Jersey. My mother is sitting on an ottoman in front of a black and white TV, weeping uncontrollably. Mommy, what's the matter? What's the matter? They killed the president. They killed the president. President Kennedy assassinated that day. That event is an impact event. It was for me. It's my earliest memory. I can see my mother right now when she was 26 years old, sitting on that ottoman. Right now, she's 84. But I can see her when she was 26. I don't remember anything before that date and very little after that date. Some of you are old enough to remember, where were you when the second plane hit the tower? Some of you are old enough. I was at my home in Weddington, North Carolina. I had the TV on behind me on 9/11. I had seen the first tower had been hit by something. I didn't know by what. And I was talking to a pastor on the phone in the north side of Charlotte, and we were talking about, he wanted me to come to his church, and we were trying to figure out what the topic would be. And I said, you got the TV on? He goes, yeah. I said, maybe a Cessna hit the World Trade Tower. And we're talking, and remember, the TV's behind me. And then suddenly he yells in the phone. He goes, the second tower just got hit. I turned around, look at the TV, the second tower's on fire. I said, was it a Cessna? He goes, no, it was a big plane. It was like a United plane. I said, you saw that? He said, it just happened on live TV. I said, look, let me call you back. I hung up the phone. And for some reason that morning I had CNN on, the communist news network. And I'm not making this up, but the commentator on CNN said, one has to think there's some sort of navigational error here. I said, navigational error? You doofus. This is the clearest day in the history of the Big Apple. What do you think, the pilots can't see where they're going? You think Stevie Wonder's flying these planes? I mean, come on. This is terrorism. I called that pastor the next day. I said, we're going to come to your church and talk about Islam because that's what this is related to. Now, 9/11 is over 20 years ago, and those of you who are old enough, you may have been 2 or 3 years old. You might remember something about that. Those who are old enough can remember something about that event. But if I were to ask you where you were and what you were doing 20 days ago, you're going to go, I don't know, man. Let me look at my iPhone. What was I doing that? You can't remember. Why can you remember something from 20 years ago but not 20 days ago? Impact event 20 years ago. No impact event 20 days ago. Ladies and gentlemen, do you think a resurrection would have been an impact event? Do you think if Jesus of Nazareth really walked out of that tomb on Sunday after being dead since Friday and then appeared to people and started doing miracles, do you think they would have remembered that? Do you think they would have had any trouble saying, no, this is what happened, I'll never forget it? Of course. If 9/11 is an impact event, if a Kennedy assassination is an impact event, then certainly a resurrection would be an impact event. That's the only reason why they would have abandoned everything on the left and adopted everything on the right virtually overnight. In fact, what did the New Testament writers have to gain by making up a new religion? What did they have to gain? They got excommunicated from the synagogue, and then they got beaten, tortured, and killed. Last time I checked, that was not a list of perks, right? We're going to start a new religion. We are? Yeah. What's it going to get us? First get kicked out of the synagogue, then beaten, tortured, and killed. Well, sign me up. You know, what a great idea. No, they're not making this up. In fact, they had every motive to say the resurrection did not happen, not every motive to say it did. In fact, last night somebody asked a question about the non-Christian writers, and I mentioned that while it's a good question, sometimes there's an illicit assumption under the question. What's the illicit assumption? Well, you can't trust the New Testament writers because, you see, they were biased. They had an agenda. Newsflash, anybody who writes anything has an agenda, okay? You don't just write randomly. But just because someone has an agenda doesn't mean they're telling a falsehood. If anybody can be trusted as to whether or not this resurrection happened, it's the people that had the most to lose by saying it did happen. And who had the most to lose? The apostles. In fact, my friend J. Warner Wallace, you may have seen him on Dateline, because he's been on Dateline more than any other cold case homicide detective in history, because he solves murders decades old. In fact, Jim also is a Christian and wrote a book called Cold Case Christianity, where he takes his cold case skills and he applies them to the greatest homicide of all time, the homicide of Jesus. Anyway, when Jim says he has found a dead body that he knows has been murdered, he says, there's only 3 reasons why that guy's dead. There's not 1,000 reasons. We don't have to hunt down 1,000 motives. There was just one of 3 or a combination of these 3 motives why that guy was murdered. There was either a sex issue, a money issue, or a power issue. Sex, money, or power. Those are the 3 things that will motivate people to murder. By the way, those are the 3 things that will motivate any of us to sin, right? Why? Because sex, money, and power are good things. They're great things. In fact, they're so good that we'll sometimes take shortcuts to get them. So if you're going to say, as Jim says, that the New Testament writers invented all this, you've got to find one or more of those 3 motivators to see, oh, maybe they did invent it. Sex, money, or power. Ladies and gentlemen, did the New Testament writers get real popular with the ladies for saying Jesus had resurrected from the dead? No. Did they get money? No, they weren't 21st century prosperity gospel preachers. Did they get power? No, they got the opposite. They got persecuted. Paul had power as a Pharisee when he was persecuting the church. As soon as he becomes a Christian, he becomes persecuted. He lost all his power. There's no motive to invent this. And every motive to say it didn't happen, yet they went to their deaths saying it did. Why would they die for a known lie? You say, wait a minute, Frank. Are you going to tell me that martyrdom somehow gives support for Christianity? What about martyrdom for Islam? Does that prove Islam's true? The answer is no. Why? Because there's a lot of differences between the Muslim martyrs of today and the New Testament martyrs of New Testament times. The Muslim martyrs of today don't have evidence or haven't witnessed anything that tells them that Islam is true. But the New Testament martyrs saw Jesus. They touched Jesus. They ate with Jesus. They verified with their own senses that Jesus had risen from the dead. You see, many people will die for a lie they think is the truth. Nobody will die for a lie they know is a lie. And the New Testament writers were in a position to know whether it was a lie or not, and they went to their deaths anyway. You can't get better evidence than that unless you were there yourself. Now, last thing on this, and for some of you who believe the Bible's inerrant like I do, this is going to sound like heresy for a minute, but it's not. Stick with me. Christianity is not true because a series of documents we put under one binding called the Bible says it's true. In fact, Christianity would be true if the Bible never existed. You say, how can that be? Because Christianity did not originate with a book. Christianity originated with an event, the resurrection. Do you realize there were thousands of Christians before a line of the New Testament was ever written? Frank, how could you be a Christian without the book of Romans? Was Paul a Christian before he wrote the book of Romans? Of course he was. That's why he wrote the book of Romans. Why did he write the book of Romans? Jesus appeared to him. He witnessed something. Was John a Christian before he wrote the Gospel of John? Of course he was. That's why he wrote the Gospel of John, because he witnessed these things. In other words, these people were writing down things that they witnessed. They didn't invent them and write them down. They witnessed them and then wrote them down. In fact, we could put it this way. The New Testament writers did not create the resurrection. The resurrection created the New Testament writers. You wouldn't have documents written in the first century by Jewish believers in Yahweh that said a man claimed to be God and rose from the dead unless a man claimed to be God and rose from the dead. Because there's every motive to say it didn't happen, not every motive to say it did. So, ladies and gentlemen, the Christian faith is not built on a book. At least it didn't originate with a book. It originated with an event. Now, thankfully, these men wrote this down so we could know it and orient our lives to it. But it would be true even if they had never wrote it down. You see the point here? This is based on an event. It's not based on a book. Now, why do I believe the book's inerrant? Because Jesus did. And I just have a personal policy. If somebody predicts and accomplishes his own resurrection from the dead, I just trust whatever the guy says. Okay? And that's what Jesus taught about the Old Testament. He said it was the Word of God, and he promised the New Testament. Now, the book goes into a lot more detail on this, so you can go further if you want. The book's available back there. These are some of the other lines of evidence we didn't have time to get into. And the overall argument, again, is, does truth exist? Does God exist? Are miracles possible? And is the New Testament true? And I think the answer to all these questions is yes. In fact, you have to have a lot more faith to believe that the answer to any of these questions is no, in my view. Now, last night I put up a number where you can get this entire PowerPoint presentation. You can still do that. Just text the word evidence to 855-909-0582. 855-909-0582. I'm going to send you the entire PowerPoint presentation, all the slides I couldn't show you because it's a lot longer than just a couple-hour presentation. And there's a few more books out there. If you'd like a book, I'll be back there right after this is over. And don't forget, as I mentioned last night, check out HollywoodHeroesBook.com, HollywoodHeroesBook.com, because if you pre-order this book that I just wrote with my son on these Hollywood movies that all point to Jesus, at least the characters have elements that point to Jesus. If you pre-order it before May 3rd, we're going to send you the audio book for free, all right? Now, we got a little bit of time for questions. We've got the microphone over here. Anyone have any questions? Anything we couldn't cover last night, we can cover now. Any questions on the New Testament you want to talk about, or even questions on anything else? So who would like to ask the first question? Don't make me stand up here and tell jokes. So we need a question. All right, so one atom said to another atom, I just lost an electron. And the second said to you first, are you sure? And the first said, I'm positive. That's my science joke. That wasn't bad, right? Oh, come on. Questions, comments, statements? You guys don't normally do this during chapel, do you? Well, we're doing it now. All right, so get a question in now. Yes, this young lady. Give her a hand, ladies and gentlemen. Here she is. Hi, what's your name?
Hi, I'm Samantha.
Hey, Samantha.
So thank you so much for coming and talking with us. I was just wondering, what do you hope that we do with the information you've given us? Because it's easy to say, yes, these things are true, but different to walk it out and apply it. So I was wondering, what is your goal whenever you give talks like these?
Hey, great question. One is, and we do this mostly on college campuses and in churches. The next college campus we're going to be at is LSU, down in Baton Rouge in about a month. And our goal when we come in and do this is to do two things: to encourage the Christians and to what we call put a stone in the shoe of the skeptics. So they're going to walk away going, oh, I hadn't heard that before. Maybe I ought to consider Christianity, or maybe I at least ought to say that maybe my worldview isn't as good as I thought it was, right? So we're trying to encourage Christians and entice skeptics to look at the material with a fresh set of eyes, so to speak. Now, I think apologetics does both of those things. Apologetics meaning giving evidence for what you believe. I think apologetics is partly for the Christian because, look, we all have periods of spiritual dryness, right? We all have our questions, and some of us have our doubts, right? There's nothing wrong with doubts if they drive you to get answers. And so I think it's important to know why you believe what you believe, not just because the Bible commands it, but because it also helps you with your personal walk with Christ, and it also helps you be a better ambassador for Him to try and reach out to people who may have questions themselves. So those are the two things, to shore up Christians, to make them better ambassadors, and to also ask skeptics to take a fresh look at the evidence, to maybe put a stone in their shoe.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Samantha. In fact, I should mention to you that we have an app called the Cross-Examined app, 2 words in the App Store. And there's a section in there, it not only has our podcast and streams our TV show, but there's a section in there about questions, and a quick answer section, I should say. So some of the prominent questions we get have quick answers in this app. And there's also, in that quick answer section, questions you ought to ask people. And many of these come from Greg Koukle's book, Tactics. And I know, Nick, where are you, Nick? You're in here somewhere. You'd use that book in one of your classes here, right? That's a great book, the book Tactics by Greg Koukle. And this book will help you, and these questions are in the app too. These questions will help you interact with people when it comes to Christianity or other questions related to religion and spirituality. And here are the 3 questions you got to get used to asking. The first question is, what do you mean by that? The second question is, how did you come to that conclusion? And the third question is, have you ever considered? Let me explain how these questions work when you're having an interaction with someone. Suppose you have a friend of yours who's not a Christian and they say, man, I can't believe the Bible. It's been changed throughout the centuries, right? My impulse, and maybe yours is to leap into a defense of why the Bible hasn't been changed throughout the centuries. But that's not what you ought to do. What you ought to do is say this. You're saying it's been changed throughout the centuries, yeah? Well, what do you mean by that? And then just be quiet. Because chances are they think we got the Bible through some sort of telephone game, right? I told something to you, and you told it to him, and he told it to him, and all the way, by the time it gets around the room, it's completely garbled. That's not how we got the Bible. But you just ask him, what do you mean by that? Second question, how did you come to that conclusion? In other words, what evidence do you have for this position? Because chances are he has no evidence. In fact, if you want to customize the question for that particular objection, you can say, how did you come to that conclusion? Have you investigated the manuscript evidence for yourself? I guarantee you the guy's not going to say, well, yeah, just last night I was up reading a book about the Byzantine line of manuscripts, right? He's not going to say that. Because here's what really the issue is. Most people base their worldview on a slogan they've heard. And they don't even know if the slogan's true. And as soon as you ask them for evidence that it's true, they can't give you any evidence. The third question is your opportunity to provide some evidence back, and that's, have you ever considered? So you might say, have you ever considered we didn't get the Bible through the telephone game? We got the Bible through eyewitnesses and others who checked with eyewitnesses who wrote these documents down, and we have so many copies of these documents that we can reconstruct the original with more than 99.5% accuracy, okay? So what do you mean by that? How did you come to that conclusion? Have you ever considered? Ladies and gentlemen, is asking questions hard? Do you have to know anything to ask questions? Answering questions is hard, so just keep asking questions. Yes, sir.
I have a question.
Rick.
Yes, sir. Number one, I have 3 quick ones.
President
First,
Rick, here he is. Go ahead, sir.
Would you teach a course for us adjunctively in apologetics?
I have to check with the powers that be, but it's possible because I've got a board, but I appreciate the invitation. Or it's possible, yes.
Yeah, well, that's probably
Okay.
yes, right? Maybe yes?
Yeah.
And secondly, will you come back in 2023?
Uh-huh.
And thirdly, I've asked people this question for 55 years, and no one's ever given me the answer. I've been searching, like Bono. What were the last names of the disciples?
The last names of the disciples?
Yeah. I think it's a fair question, you know.
Wow. All the disciples, or just the guys that wrote the documents?
Yeah.
Luke the Doctor, that was his last
That's
name.
a good one. Yeah.
Luke the Doctor.
I like that. Thanks.
John the Eyewitness. I'm making stuff up now. Thanks, President Rick. Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. I have a question about last night you had spoke about the cosmic Big Bang.
Yes.
Okay. So if God spoke, let there be light, and there was light.
Uh-huh.
And he spoke of different things of let there be, and it came about.
Right.
What exactly was the Big Bang?
The Big Bang is the scientific evidence and the philosophical evidence that there was a beginning. And we as Christians would say that aligns perfectly within the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. So we didn't have time to go through the evidence last night, but there's scientific evidence that shows that the universe had a beginning. An easy way to remember it is the acronym 𝗧𝗔𝗫, S-U-R-G-E. Second law of thermodynamics, the fact that the universe is expanding, the radiation afterglow from the initial Big Bang explosion. In other words, the remnant heat from the Big Bang is still out there. G stands for the great galaxy seeds. Those were temperature variations in the radiation afterglow that allowed the galaxies to form in the early universe. And the E stands for Einstein's theory of general relativity, which shows that space, matter, and time are correlative. They came into existence together. And then you add a philosophical argument that there can't be an infinite number of days before today, because if there were an infinite number of days before today, this day never would have arrived, because you always have to live another day before you get to today. So if there was only a finite number of days before today, that means time had a beginning. And if time had a beginning, what could have created time? Something timeless. And if you're timeless, do you have a cause? No, because you don't have a beginning. You are the uncaused first cause. So that's in a nutshell the argument that the universe had a beginning. Now, Genesis 1:1 is a poetic way of telling us that God created the universe. And personally, I think Genesis 1:1 is a polemic against the Egyptian and Babylonian creation stories. For example, the Egyptian creation stories have the Egyptian gods either are self-created or they already exist in the universe somehow, and what they do is they bring order to chaos. Moses comes along and says, no, God isn't inside the universe. God is outside the universe, and he created the whole thing, and he just speaks, and order comes from chaos. He doesn't have to fight other gods or any of this. He just speaks, and it happens. Because we need to remember, we have to go back and put ourselves in the minds of the original people to whom this was written. It was written to people who had just left Egypt in an exodus. They'd been slaves for 400 years. When they're walking through the desert, they're not walking through going, gee, I wonder how old this place is. You know, I wonder if creation or evolution is true. They're not asking those questions. They want to know, is Yahweh the true God or are the Egyptian gods the true gods? So Moses is writing a polemic against the Egyptian creation story to say, no, Yahweh's the true creator. And he tells it in a poetic way, although he's telling history in a poetic way. It's not Hebrew poetry, but it is a poetic way of explaining it. You know, you got 3 days of creating, 3 days of filling. Day 1 and day 4 are congruent, day 2 and day 5, day 3 and day 6. And it's all very structured. So I think it aligns with the fact that there was a beginning, but the opening text of Genesis is not designed to be a scientific explanation of how this all came about. That it came about by the power of God is true, but how it came about in scientific detail, that's not the purpose of the text. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right. Anyone else? All right, I guess we're done then. Are we? All right. Well, thanks for being here, ladies and gentlemen. Hope to see you next year. I'll be at the table if anybody wants to talk or get a book or